The cave was quiet when they dragged the first king out into the light. Dust and fragments of stone slid down the rock face as soldiers pulled at the boulders, sealing the entrance. The morning sun over Canaan was already hot, baking the hillside above the town of Makkedah. Men squinted as the dark mouth of the cave opened wider. Inside, 5 armored figures huddled together, the remnants of the coalition that had marched out to crush Israel and instead watch their armies die on the run. Joshua stood a short distance away, his cloak streaked with dust and sweat, his sword at his side. His men formed a ring around the cave, shields and spears held ready, though everyone knew the battle was over. These kings were not coming out to fight. They were coming out to be judged. Only days earlier, those same men had ridden at the head of a united force. Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, had been the first to call for war. News had reached him that the city of Gibeon had surrendered to Joshua without a fight, making peace with the Israelites who had crossed the Jordan. Gibeon was strong, a royal city with seasoned warriors. If it had chosen a treaty instead of resistance, Jerusalem and the other Amorite cities could not pretend the danger was far away. Adoni-Zedek sent messengers to 4 neighboring kings, Hoham of Hebron, Piram of Jarmuth, Japhia of Lachish, and Debir of Eglon. Each ruled a fortified city in the southern hill country. Rather than surrender, they agreed to strike first, not against Israel directly, but against Gibeon for daring to change sides. Their armies assembled and marched through the night toward the city that had once been their ally. When the Amorite coalition reached Gibeon, they surrounded it, confident they could destroy it before Joshua could respond. Inside Gibeon's walls, men stood on the ramparts and watched the encirclement tighten. They had made a covenant with Israel in haste, tricking Joshua into accepting a treaty by pretending to be travelers from far away. But the vow had been sworn in the name of the Lord, and Joshua had honored it. Now the Gibeonites sent word to the Israelite camp at Gilgal, begging for help. "Do not abandon your servants," their message said. "Come quickly and save us." Joshua gathered his fighting men and marched through the night from Gilgal up into the high country. The path climbed steeply, but the column did not slow. Joshua carried more than weapons with him. He carried a promise: "Do not be afraid of them. I have handed them over to you. Not one of them will be able to stand against you." Just before dawn, the Israelites fell on the Amorite camp outside Gibeon. Warriors who had expected to spend the morning tightening a siege instead woke to shouts, trumpet blasts, and the slam of bronze on shields. Lines broke quickly. The coalition soldiers tried to regroup, then turned and ran downslope, away from the city they had planned to destroy. Joshua pressed the advantage. Israelite troops chased the fleeing armies along the road toward Beth Horon. Panic spread through the Amorite columns. Men threw down shields to run faster. Cartwheels snapped on stones. Horses screamed as they stumbled and fell. As the route carried them into lower ground, the sky itself joined the attack. Huge hailstones began to fall, slamming into the packed earth and crashing through shields and helmets. More men died from the hail than from the swords of Joshua's soldiers. Still, the day was not long enough for Joshua's purpose. As he watched the enemy streaming away, he called out to the Lord in the hearing of Israel and asked for more light. Tradition records that the sun seemed to stand still over Gibeon and the moon over the valley of Aijalon, giving the pursuers time to finish the rout. Whatever the exact sign in the sky, the result on the ground was clear. The Amorite coalition shattered. Survivors scattered toward their fortified cities, hoping to find safety behind stone walls. The kings who had led them did not make it that far. Adoni-Zedek and his 4 allies had already broken from the main force. Instead of riding back to their capitals, they diverted south, looking for a place to hide while they waited to learn whether any part of their army remained. Near Makkedah, they found a cave large enough to hold all 5. There, in the cool darkness, Kings who had once stood on city walls now crouched in silence, listening to the sounds of the battle fade. Joshua soon heard that the leaders of the coalition had been spotted entering the cave. He ordered large stones rolled across the mouth and posted guards, then turned back to the work of pursuing the remnants of the Amorite troops. Only after the chase had ended and the surviving soldiers had been cut down did he return to Makkedah. That is where the story began this morning, with dust falling from the hillside as the stones were pulled away and the captured kings were dragged out. They were still dressed in the remnants of their royal armor. Their faces were smeared with sweat and dirt. Some tried to hold themselves upright, the last habits of dignity refusing to die. Others stared at the ground, knowing what waited for them. Joshua called the commanders of his army forward. These men had marched through the desert, crossed the Jordan, and watched entire cities fall. They had also felt their own fear when facing enemies with chariots and fortified towns. Joshua told them to come and place their feet on the necks of the kings lying in the dust. It was not bravado for its own sake. As the commanders obeyed, Joshua reminded them of what had brought them here. "Do not be afraid or discouraged," he said. "Be strong and courageous, for the Lord will do this to all the enemies you fight." When the words were finished, the executions began. There was no elaborate spectacle, no slow torture. Joshua struck the kings and put them to death, carrying out the sentence himself. Their bodies were then hung on trees near the cave as a warning to anyone watching from the surrounding hills. All that day, the 5 figures hung in the sun, reminders that the coalition against Israel had been broken at its highest level. Near sunset, Joshua ordered the bodies taken down. The law given through Moses did not permit a body to remain on a tree overnight. Even in an act of judgment, there were limits that had to be honored. The soldiers carried the corpses back to the cave where the kings had tried to hide. They threw them inside and rolled great stones across the entrance once again, sealing the makeshift tomb. With the coalition leaders dead, Joshua pressed the campaign deeper into the south. Makkedah itself was captured and its king struck down. Libnah fell next, then Lachish, where an allied king from farther west tried and failed to break Israel's advance. Eglon, Hebron, and Debir followed. What had begun as a response to a plea for help from Gibeon became a dismantling of Amorite power in the hill country. For the Gibeonites, the sight of those kings dragged from the cave and executed was a harsh reminder of the cost of choosing sides. They had lied to obtain their treaty, but the covenant had saved them from the fate of other cities. For the people of Israel, the scene at Makkedah marked a turning point. They had watched Joshua confront the most powerful rulers in the region and carry out a sentence that felt as much like a divine verdict as a military one. The cave with its sealed entrance remained, stones stacked against the darkness that had once sheltered 5 men who thought themselves untouchable. The armies they led no longer existed. Their cities would never again command the heights over Gibeon. The story of their rise and fall would be told not as the triumph of Canaanite kings, but as another chapter in how Israel took the land it had been promised. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.